Good afternoon. I'm calling to order the House Committee on Consumer Protection and Commerce. It is Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. Time is 2 p.m. We're in conference room 329. First on the agenda, we have HCR 151, HR 130, requesting the Department of Accounting and General Services to conduct a study on the feasibility of exempting all state-related construction from county permitting requirements and establishing a permitting division within the department to be responsible for permitting services for all state-related construction. I don't believe we have any scheduled testifiers here. Is there anyone to testify on this measure? Okay, seeing none, members, we do have written testimony and support from the Department of Accounting and General Services. Okay, we'll be moving on to HCR 100. This is encouraging developers to incorporate net zero water building strategies when constructing and renovating housing projects in the state. First to testify, we have Dean Minakami from Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation with comments. Not here. Any other person here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony with comments from HPHA and supportive testimony from Ulupono Initiative. Okay, we'll be moving on to HCR 139, HR 120, requesting the State Building Code Council to adopt, amend, or update the State Building Code to authorize point access block construction for residential buildings up to 6 stories in the state. First to testify on this measure, actually, we do not have any persons here to testify. Is there anyone? Okay, seeing none, members, we do have written testimony and support from the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Moving on, we have HCR 212, HR 192, urging the Department of Health to investigate and implement policies to reduce the importation of products, packaging, or materials containing perfluoro and PFAS into the state. First to testify on this measure, we have the Department of Health with comments on Zoom.
Good afternoon, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Sayama, and members of the committee. My name is Michael Burke. I'm with the Hawaii State Department of Health. We stand on our written testimony offering comments, and I am available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other persons here to testify on this measure? Okay, seeing none, members, any questions? Actually, I do have a question for Department of Health. In your written testimony, you noted that there were additional efforts to study the health effects of PFAS to people and the environment. You mentioned that there are federal studies being conducted currently. Can you specify which studies or efforts are being conducted on the federal level?
This is nationwide. We do have, the FDA, the EPA, and the CDC are all funding various studies, and these are nationwide efforts to assess and understand the impacts of PFAS on the human body. And I think one of the big ones is uptake, right? Like if you use PFAS, serviceware, fork, how much of that PFAS then could potentially get into your system. Locally, these are the studies, the 6 that we listed in our written testimony. Those are studies that DOH itself is doing. These are all primarily headed through our HERE office. So I don't have the information as to which of these studies are federally funded versus funds that DOH was able to scrounge up. But I would suspect that at least some of them are being conducted using federal funds as well.
Okay, thank you. And just a follow-up on that, based off of current studies and understanding by the department on PFAS's impact to human health, would you generally agree that consumption of PFAS materials by humans is detrimental to human health?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's no question that we would prefer that, and going forward, it looks like that the data is such that, that PFAS is an issue. The direct linkages and the amounts, there's enough questions that we're not necessarily, we don't necessarily have all the information that we would like. But I think that, there's a trend, and, it's not only our studies, but again, some of these other studies from the CDC and FDA, where it's looking more and more as if the efforts to at least at a minimum, reduce the amount of PFAS is something that we're all working towards, and it's important because of the impacts to human health.
Okay, thank you. And so if we were to limit the scope of this resolution from all imported products into the state containing PFAS materials to just the consumable products, would the Department of Health be willing to examine the impacts of that and develop policies to mitigate those risks?
I think so. I think one of the challenges that we had with this resolution was primarily on the fact that in the world of PFAS, the products are everywhere. And so there are products, like we mentioned, that aren't under DOH's control, like Gore-Tex, for example, or paint and furniture. So by narrowing the scope, at least, and I think that, using as a blueprint the current bill, House Bill 1686, I believe it is, or 1896. I'm sorry. So there's a PFAS bill I can email to you that does limit the types of products that contain PFAS that we would want to look at.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, members. Any further questions? Representative Onishi.
Yeah, for Department of Health.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here. So in your studies that you guys are looking at, or the data that you're looking at, is part of that how much PFAS chemicals leach into food through the containers that they're packaged in?
From my understanding, no, that's not something that we're currently studying right now. I think the closest thing that we are doing is looking at compost that contains PFAS, and then how much of that PFAS is then uptaken into plants. And because that would be a concern. But insofar as like direct contact with, say, like a food container, how much gets leached into the food itself, my understanding is no, that's not currently, at least not by DOH. I would be very surprised if that's not being studied by a larger entity like the FDA.
Okay, so can you really summarize what you guys are actually studying then?
Currently, and again, these are all coming from our sister agency, the HERE office within DOH. I'm with the Food and Drug Branch, but currently we're studying PFAS in nearshore environments, specifically seawater and reef fish, in the nearshore environment. We're also studying PFAS in fish that are consumed, and so these are fish products, seafood products that you would purchase from local markets, retail stores. We are doing studies on PFAS in wastewater, biosolids, and in landfill leachate. Obviously a big one and something that's made the news is studying PFAS in drinking water. And then also similar, but a different focus is PFAS in specifically Red Hill groundwater in the monitoring wells. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the study that we're conducting, that the HERE office is conducting on PFAS in compost and food crops that are grown in that compost.
Okay, so does Department of Health have the ability to test, like fish, for example, consume fish for PFAS?
Yeah, that's one of the studies that we're currently doing is on frequently eaten fish that's purchased from local supermarkets.
Okay, so how long has this been study going on?
I don't have the details on that. Again, this is being conducted by a different branch, but I can look into that and email you, sir.
Okay, I thought that's what you guys were doing, checking fish.
The Department of Health is, yes. It's just that, insofar as the products, a large number of those would fall under my branch's jurisdiction. It's just that the studies themselves are being conducted by a different DOH branch. So I just don't have the specific information.
So when will these studies be concluded and report written so that we can know whether or not a resolution like this or bills regarding this will actually have an impact?
Again, I can get back to you on that information. I don't know exactly when the timelines are for these studies to be completed. I do know that, for example, the compost study was in Lahaina, and while the study site itself was not impacted, there has been a disruption, just in Lahaina itself because of the wildfires. And so, these are moving targets. But I will be happy to get more information on these studies and email you directly or the committee directly.
So the Lahaina study is studying composting material in Lahaina.
It was outside of Lahaina, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, but that facility is DOH permitted?
I'm fairly certain, yes.
Okay, and they're using that compost to grow food crops?
Again, it's a study that's being conducted to understand when you have compost that has PFAS in it, how much of that PFAS is then uptaken into food crops. This is not for commercial use. This is not for retail. This is just strictly a study that's being conducted.
Okay, well, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
members, any further questions? Representative Lowen.
Sure. I guess, Mike, just to clarify, this reso is just sort of, it's not specifically, I mean, first of all, it's a reso, not a bill. And it's just directing the TOH to, I guess, in my view, take some proactive action on looking at, like, sort of stemming the tide of PFAS coming into the state, because we know once they're here, they, end up, ultimately often end up in the environment, and then that is a much more difficult problem to deal with because of how long they take to break down, which is why they're called forever chemicals. So, I mean, the testimony implying that somehow this reso is mandating that you take action on the entire universe or do nothing at all, it doesn't seem to be a fair reading of it. I mean, can you comment on that and talk about what the department is doing, if anything, proactively to try to address some of the more problematic items, I guess?
Sure. I think, largely, and this is, our apologies in that, we kind of looked at this as a black or white resolution. But insofar as, what DOH is doing, a big part of it is just, initially we want to get a grasp, right? We know that, that there are some products, at least based on federal guidelines, there are some products that are more problematic than others, depending on the manufacturing, depending on the amount of contact, either with the human skin or intake through consumption. And so getting a better handle on just the world of PFAS, this is something that, it's been around for a long time, but understanding the negative impacts really have happened only, within the last several years. And so, that's where we're focused on right now is to get ourselves a baseline to understand what kind of levels are actually harmful to humans and how much, if you get, say, a chunk of ahi and there's PFAS in it, in and of itself, is that dangerous, or is there a certain amount that's consumed that then remains with the body? And these are things that we, we're working on trying to resolve. And by we, I mean collectively, not only DOH, but again, this is a big issue that's being studied, nationwide. And so I think that's really been our focus, has been on, like we highlight, some of these studies that we're undertaking before we jump, into the deep end of the pool. And that doesn't mean that we won't, look at our own practices and look at, what policies that we could potentially develop and potentially in the future implement to try to, to be more proactive and get moving on PFAS within our control and within our jurisdiction.
Okay. And just because some of the statements you made seemed ambiguous and some of the line of questioning seemed ambiguous, I mean, there's a scientifically clearly established link between exposure to PFAS and many
And
human
human health, yeah.
problems. You know, hence why the EPA took action to dramatically lower the amount that's acceptable in drinking water, which they wouldn't do without significant, evidence that's peer-reviewed and published scientifically. So I don't want anyone to mistake, because you said you're studying, to see if consuming it in ahi has any health impacts or not. Well, I think the studies that have been conducted clearly show that, consumption of PFAS has impacts. And of course, people are being exposed through many different avenues.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, members, any further questions? Representative Bellotti.
I'm going to re-ask Representative Onishi's questions again. The studies listed in your testimony,
Yes, ma'am.
what is the timeline on each of these studies? If you can just go through bullet points, lines 8 through 13.
Like I mentioned, I apologize. These studies are currently being managed by a different program. And so to get a timeline for you, I'd be more than happy to collect the completion dates and email the committee on that.
Okay, and then when you say they're being conducted by different programs within DOH, what are those divisions within DOH that are conducting these programs?
It's all of these studies are being overseen by the HERE office.
The HERE office, the
Hazard Evaluation and Emergency Response.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Last one.
Representative
I'm
Lowen.
sorry. We didn't expect this to take so long. And also, just to clarify, I think these studies are important because you want to understand the human health impacts of PFAS that are already present in our environment. But what this reso is looking at also is preventing us adding additional, finding ways to add additional. And, I would imagine, even if you're looking at policies to, like, say the results of this study show that PFAS is present in frequently eaten fish, what would DOH's recommendation then be? Just to not consume fish? How would you?
At a minimum, we would have to look at how we can, notify the public. But that certainly would become that would be something that we would definitely need to address.
Yeah, but I think that,
Yeah.
would you agree that policies to stop importing additional PFAS into the state where they can, end up in places like in the fish that we eat is something we should be thinking about now as soon as possible?
Yes.
All right,
Agreed.
thank you.
Okay, members, any further questions? Representative Onishi.
Yeah, I have another follow-up for Department of Health. So
Yes, sir.
I think everybody would agree that, the potential threat might be there, but there's also potential costs in this resolution to restrict all products, packaging, and materials containing PFAS to the state, and what would be alternatives to what's being currently used, and whether or not there is a hazard from that material or not, or how it is recycled or, disposed of, and what effect it would have on the environment. So all of those things need to be, wouldn't you agree that all of these things would need to be considered before
Yes,
making
sir.
a policy decision?
Yes, sir. And I think that's part of it. The fact that, we do recognize that PFAS has a, tremendous impact, terrible impact on the environment, that, these chemicals don't break down. They don't go away. And they do bioaccumulate. And so how do we address that? But also we have to understand that, just a wholesale, prohibition, which I don't know that the department necessarily has, the ability to do. But, something like that would also have an impact on our local businesses and the cost that our local residents pay. And so, I think that's part of being a part of a public agency is to understand and balance, all of the impacts, both to our human health, to the environmental health, as well as to our economic health.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, members, any further questions? Representative Lowen.
To clarify, nothing in this reso says that you must or must not restrict any specific product or every product, because I know the word restrict was used. That's not in this reso, is it?
As much as, as far as we could tell, it was more a reduction in addressing the importation and reducing the importation.
And a
of
request for
products.
DOH to look at what policies might be implemented, which to me amounts to, kind of one of the fundamental functions of DOH to look at policies to protect the health of the environment and human health.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, members, any further questions?
No more questions.
Okay, very good.
No more.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for testifying. We appreciate it. All right. Moving on to HCR 213, HD1, HR 193, HD1, requesting the Hawaii State Energy Office to convene a renewable liquid fuel working group to study local production, development, and incentives for renewable liquid fuels. First to testify, we have the Hawaii State Energy Office in support.
Thank you, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Sayama, members of the committee, Mark Glick, Chief Energy Officer, Hawaii State Energy Office. We stand on our testimony in support of HCR 213 and are happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Henry Curtis from Life of Land in opposition on Zoom.
Aloha. I'm Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Life of Land opposes this bill or this resolution. The first whereas states, renewable liquid fuels offer a viable solution to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. Some do, some don't. Some increase emissions, some decrease emissions. But the group of people on the group that are looking at this are heavily stacked in supporting biofuels without a clear reference that you need to only look at biofuels that sharply reduce emissions, and without a more balanced panel looking at it, we oppose this resolution. Mahalo.
Thank you. Next, we have Chris Bennett from Pono Pacific in support.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Chris Bennett, Pono Pacific. We'll stand on our written testimony in support of the bill.
Thank you. Next, we have Mark Inoue from PAR Hawaii in support.
Hello, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Sayama, members of the committee. My name is Mark Inoue from PAR Hawaii. We stand on our written testimony in support, and given the valuable input and studies already conducted by several parties, we believe that there is sufficient information to narrow the scope of work and to ensure that an interim report and recommendations can be provided before January 1st, 2025, before next year's 2025 legislative session. I'll be here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lori Lum from Airlines Committee of Hawaii in support.
Good afternoon, Lori Lum on behalf of the Airlines Committee of Hawaii. We are in support, as the Airlines Committee of Hawaii represents both domestic and international carriers, and sustainable aviation fuel initiatives are a priority of the industry. We'd like to request an amendment to include a representative from the Airlines Committee be invited to participate in the working group. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Next, we have Jacob Bucky from Alaska Airlines in support. Not here. Are there any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony in support from Hawaii Farm Bureau, Airlines for America, Island Energy Services, and an individual in support. Members, any questions? Representative Onishi.
Yeah, for the Energy Office, please. Hi, thanks for being here. I think a working group might make sense, but what, how much fuel would something like this biofuel, I guess petroleum-based fuel, right, is what we're looking to replace? if the biofuel is produced in Hawaii, what is that percentage of biofuel do you think can be produced in Hawaii to offset what we currently are importing?
Rep. Onishi, it's an outstanding question. The truth of the matter is that it will be a relatively small proportion. It'll be locally produced. It'll be important that we maximize the amount of production for whatever we can produce that's not it won't inhibit the use of those same agricultural resources for food production. But I would expect it to be certainly less than 15% of the total need. So ultimately, particularly if we're looking at, there's a replacement for transportation fuels, biofuels is a part of the mix, that will largely have to be imported. But I think this measure and this approach is about how much of the local production can be maximized to produce biofuels in particular.
So there would need to be a balance between the agricultural land that we're using for food production, which is in terms of the percentage of food that we produce in Hawaii compared to what we consume in Hawaii or import to Hawaii as consumable, is relatively low. And so that's goal number one, right? Is to try to increase food production in order to offset what we are importing. Now, if we were to start producing biofuel from ag products, we would have to dedicate how much of that ag land that we currently say is not in actual agriculture production. Because most of the agriculture production that we use for food products are in A and B land, which is very limited.
So, Rep. Onishi, I believe that, Act 73, 2010, the Food and Energy Security Act, really came about, I think, to press forward this question about what's the right balance of food and energy production. And, just again to reiterate, we're not going to be able to resolve the energy production. So whatever land, and I think this particular working group could address this question. I think this will be a primary question to address, which hasn't really been, I think, adequately or succinctly answered. What would be the various options for the trade-off between food production and energy production, specifically biofuels, using ag lands? And then what is the total amount of production? How far would that get you so that we can realistically set expectations in the future about what can be done with ag land for energy production, which I will acknowledge will be a very small percentage of our overall energy needs.
And we're talking about fuel, right? Because we're already using ag land to do renewable energy, like solar farms, windmills, those kinds of things.
That's correct.
Yeah, so, but one of the other issues that is being asked to be studied is evaluate existing and potential new tax incentives for the development and utilization of renewable liquid fuels in Hawaii. So I'm interpreting this as there needs to be financial incentives in order for people to consider heading down this road. It's not something where it is potentially, a significant moneymaker for somebody to invest their own money into and recoup it on the end by selling the biofuel. Is that correct?
Certainly, biofuels production today is challenging economically. It doesn't usually compete favorably with what it's replacing. And so subsidies have been, are available, and there have been, I guess, interest in increasing or adding state subsidies, actually adding the amount of state subsidy that might be available for this. So that's certainly one of the questions that would be addressed in this study.
So, the current conversion of used oils in
Yes.
Hawaii to biofuel, does that have a subsidy?
It has a production tax credit.
In essence, that's a
Yeah,
state subsidy.
It does have a state subsidy associated
Right?
with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Representative Bellotti.
I have a follow-up question. And this entire area is sort of new to me, but intriguing. In Hawaii Farm Bureau's testimony, they say these crops can thrive on marginal lands. So is the study also to look at the potential to build out biofuels on lands that are not A and B lands? Is that part of the studies?
Yes.
And is that a realistic expectation that we can grow fuels on marginal lands? Because if it is, then I think the study could actually be very valuable. Like, we want to use lands that are not necessarily A and B lands. And if certainly if it can address our energy issues, then it's a positive thing. Do you have an understanding of what that area looks like now? Or does anyone in the audience have a sense?
From the Energy Office's perspective, we know that it's possible to grow this on marginal lands, but to be able to give you a concise answer, I'm not sure that there are clear studies that will address the magnitude of that. So I think that's something that we would look at very closely in this study.
I think that would be hugely valuable. If there's anyone else in the audience that has expertise that might be able
Please
to,
come up to the podium.
because I mean, that makes a case to have a study.
Hi, Chris Bennett with Pono Pacific. So we are currently conducting crop trials with a cover crop called camelina. Some of the things that are of interest is that it does not compete with food production. So we are actively engaging with farmers. I don't want to necessarily name names, but with food production farmers and looking to use it in rotation with their food production. So then instead of having a fallow period where they have no economic benefit, they would be able to produce crops that could be used for biofuel production. And then as an added benefit, we've been having talks with the cattle industry and the dairy industry. So one of their major concerns is they don't have local sources of good animal feed. So one of the byproducts of extracting the oil is called the seed cake, which is a federally approved animal feed. So that would give the farmer a couple additional economic avenues while also producing biofuel feedstock for the refinery.
Okay. And then your kind of group stands ready to help inform any studies that this working group might be looking at doing.
Yes, I
Okay.
mean, we totally support this resolution, would love to have a seat at the table from the agricultural production crop study angle. And then another issue that was brought up is the crop that we're looking at, camelina, is low water intensity and could also be used on lands that are marginal and are not currently being used for agriculture. So we look at as an additive. So if it proves successful, it's another economic avenue, and that could lead into more agricultural production, not less.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Thank you, Chair.
Members, any further questions? Representative Onishi.
Yes. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. So, question, would this process require state subsidy?
So I think, as was previously said, there already is a subsidy in place for the local production of renewable fuels. There was some legislation proposed this year. I'm not sure it's going to pass. I don't think it is, but to expand that tax credit. And I think the working group could look into some of the issues that were raised this year and develop that further.
So the tax credits are offered for people to consider looking at this as a possibility, correct?
The working group itself wouldn't.
No,
require
not the
tax
working group,
credits.
the
Yeah.
tax credits.
That's my
Tax
understanding.
credits in place
Yes.
was designed to help companies to begin to explore whether or not there's this possibility.
The tax credits are in place if biofuel is produced.
Right,
So it's a production credit, yes.
right. So it is to try to incentivize this process.
Yes.
But once this is done, in your estimation, your company, your future, would tax credits still have to be given for your production in order for you to make it reasonable and profitable for you as a company to continue this effort?
I think the answer would be nobody would look for a never-ending tax credit. I think there would be a tax credit to get the industry. So we're talking about basically a whole new industry to get it up and running.
Well, not every industry needs tax credits to get up and running, right?
Right.
Some are profitable from the beginning, but those that are marginal need these tax credits in order to incentivize businesses to come in. And sometimes tax credits have to be provided forever in order to maintain that industry.
Right.
Because then it becomes a different initiative to keep people working. So, camelina, what's
Yeah.
the growing cycle?
The general growing cycle is 80 to 100 days. The crop trials we've run have come in around 70 odd days.
So it's similar to corn that's used for, what do you call it?
Ethanol?
Yeah,
I'm not exactly sure what the corn growing cycle is.
okay. So can this be grown and harvested on C, D, and E land?
We are going to find out, but that is the hope.
But most of the cover crop requirements are going to be on A and B land, correct?
Yeah, so I think that's our initial partnerships is working with commercial farmers who have the expertise. But I think as we look to expand and we look to continue to prove out that it can grow on marginal lands, we're going to do that.
So do you have a sense as to 1 acre of camelina, how much seed would be produced? And from that seed, how much actual biofuel or bio-oil you'd be able to produce?
Sure. So specific to Hawaii, that's what we're trying to figure out. If you're looking just at general literature, the yields can range anywhere from 800 pounds an acre all the way up to 2,100 pounds an acre of seed. Then one of the reasons camelina is an interesting crop is the oil content is 30 to 40% of that seed weight. So you do the math and you come up with the amount that we'd be able to get per acre. But it would depend on what the yield is in any specific geographic location that you're growing in.
So you guys haven't started any trials yet?
We have.
Okay, so what has been the results of those trials?
They are currently ongoing. We haven't done enough trials to be able to give you a definitive answer.
So if say, for example, 1 acre in Hawaii produces 1,000 pounds, you'd get 300 pounds of biofuel,
Yes,
right? Or
Correct.
bio-oil.
bio-oil.
That bio-oil then, how would that be converted to actually a biofuel that would be able to, I guess, run a diesel truck? How many gallons of, say, biodiesel would be produced?
Right, so I don't work for the refinery, but PAR Hawaii is currently, they've publicly announced plans to spend $90 million to retrofit a portion of their Kalailoa refinery, specifically to process biofuels.
Okay. Vice Chair, can I ask PAR to come up?
Yes, please.
So you heard my question, like from 300 pounds of bio-oil, how much actual biodiesel would be able to be produced? Or whatever the
Sure.
equivalent of diesel or gas.
So what Mr. Bennett was talking about, we are expanding, well, we're going to be retrofitting one of our refinery units at the refinery. It's going to be 100% renewable fuels, meaning we'll be making sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, renewable naphtha. And all those different fuels can fit in different sectors as well. So aviation, utilities, and transportation as well. So that unit in 1 year will be able to produce 60 million gallons of renewable fuels. And depending what the market here needs, we'll be able to make. If it's more sustainable aviation fuel, we can do that. And then also renewable diesel.
So what are you making this fuel from?
Currently, many refineries across the world are using soybean oil right now. But they are, and agriculture in the States and worldwide are looking at other alternatives, other sustainable crops that can be used for sustainable fuels. Currently, soybeans, from what I understand through farming, cannot grow so well out here in Hawaii. That's why they're looking at camelina.
So currently, right, I mean, there's research already. So how much oil is made, how much oil, so say we had 1,000 pounds of soybeans, how much oil is produced from that soybean?
I don't know the answer, but I can get you that answer to you.
Okay, so then if you had soybean oil, right, how much does it take to make 1 gallon of biodiesel?
I don't
I
have
mean, there's research out there already, right?
There probably is research out there. We're actually already building the infrastructure because we have to keep all those different oils separate, the fossil fuel oils from the soybean oil or camelina oil. So we're actually building those tanks out now so we can put those types of crop-based plant oils in there. But I can probably speak with some of our engineers and production staff that can get you that answer.
Okay, so right now, you guys are renovating your plant,
Yes.
and your plan is to import soybean oil.
Part of it has to be importing
Right.
to make sure we can, produce
To
enough.
produce your 16 million
Yes,
gallons
correct.
of fuel,
Yep.
right? And so from this imported soybean oil, you'll be able to make all 3 different types of fuel?
Correct.
And is some of it a byproduct of the same gallon of oil? In other words, so if you're going to make aviation fuel, right, where you get so much aviation fuel out of a gallon and so much naphtha.
Correct. Yeah,
So-
so they break it down.
Yeah,
From my understanding of our refinery unit, it cannot just go 100%, say, sustainable aviation fuel. I believe it's going to be a 60-40 or 40-60 type of production.
yeah, so maybe out of a gallon of soybean oil, you only get 40 or 60% of
One type
aviation
of
fuel, right? Do you know how much is consumed? And what, your price break, is it going to be comparable to what's being imported now?
So that's a good question. You know, and that's why we were seeking the incentives for the renewable fuels production tax credit this past session on different bills. And a lot of that is because, you know, feedstock, to import that feedstock, especially soybean oil, is very expensive. You might get the government subsidies, but a lot of states like California, Oregon, Washington, I believe, they all have state subsidies for local production of renewable fuels. So we just kind of want that even market, where, you know, it'll help offset that cost so that our customers like Hawaiian Electric and Hawaiian Airlines can, you know, buy these fuels and it won't, you know, disrupt the pricing for residents.
But those tax incentives cost the consumer, right? So in essence, the consumer is paying a higher price for the same utility, right? I mean, whatever that kilowatt of, you know, electricity that they consume now comes at a higher cost because there's a tax subsidy to produce the fuel that they're using to generate that kilowatt hour.
Yeah, and this is hopefully the kind of, like the startup as Mr. Bennett was talking about, is we want to get this industry hopefully going. There's probably going to be technological and market changes that will maybe have these subsidies eventually, you know, either go away or phase out. But we believe there's going to be technological advances to help biofuels, any type of biofuels, renewable fuels, for Hawaii and probably worldwide.
So as far as for PAR Hawaii, right, and your financial analysis on moving forward in this direction, do you really see viability in Hawaii growing feedstock to produce enough, you know, bio oil for your needs, you know, to eventually eliminate all subsidies and still provide a price point that's equitable to what's being.
That's a great probably analysis that we are looking to do, an economical kind of analysis around a market study around all these types of issues. But for us, it's, you know, for PAR Hawaii, keeping jobs is important for us. We got many great employees who work not just at a refinery, but in logistics, who help move fuel to all the different islands. We also look at, you know, will this help farming and the ag industry, as Mr. Bennett was talking about? Will it create more job opportunities in that sense? More folks spending money in, you know, jobs, spending money in the economy as well. And I think those are kind of, you know, important things we'd like to find out as well. I mean, through this working group, through further studies, I think, you know, we understand that this year wasn't going to happen, you know, all at once. But this discussion is healthy, it's good for Hawaii as we try to reach our very aggressive clean energy goals as well.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you,
members.
Vice Chair.
Thank you.
you.
Members, any further questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll be moving on to HCR 5, HR 1, urging retail stores and pharmacies doing business in the state to adopt a policy on a national and local level guaranteeing an individual's unhindered access to all United Statehood and Drug Administration approved contraceptives. Members, I don't think we have any persons here to testify. Is there anyone? Okay, seeing none, members, we do have written testimony in support from Save Medicaid Hawaii, Hawaii State Democratic Women's Caucus, Aloha Care, as well as 5 individuals in support. Okay, we'll be moving on to HCR 53, requesting the auditor to assess the social and financial effects of mandatory health insurance coverage for biomarker testing. Are there, first testify, we do have Cynthia Al from American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network in support.
Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members, Cynthia Al on behalf of the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. Thank you for the opportunity to support HCR 53. We stand on our testimony. I do want to note that nearly 60% of all cancer drugs approved in the last 5 years require or recommend biomarker testing before use. And biomarker testing isn't only limited to oncology or cancer. There are targeted therapies for lupus, ALS, preeclampsia, arthritis, Alzheimer's, and heart disease. And I am here for if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other persons here to testify on this measure? Okay, seeing none, members, we do have written testimony in support from the Disability and Communication Access Board as well as the Alzheimer's Association. Members, any questions? Representative Onishi.
Yeah, for American Cancer Society, I had a question. So these biomarker testing, if you have cancer and you're going to go into treatment with some drug or stuff, this requirement for the biomarker testing is not covered by medical insurance?
So currently, there are some coverage for private insurers and Medicaid, but they don't cover all the biomarker testing that's available.
But they cover those that are medically necessary?
I believe so, yes.
Because this resolution speaks to,
So there are currently coverage, but it's not consistent across the board. Like not all insurances cover all the tests that are available if they fit the criteria to receive the tests.
so different plans?
Yes.
Don't cover,
May not cover.
but those plans are individual choice, right?
Oh, I don't understand the question.
In other words, the individual determines what plan they're going to subscribe to and what coverages they have.
Yeah,
It's not, we don't have one plan that everybody has to participate in.
yes. So, I
Correct?
mean, depends on like what your employer has
Has
or
to
whether or
offer.
not has to offer or if,
How much you want to pay,
yes.
how much, I mean, if you're young and you think you're invincible, you buy the cheapest, right, insurance, right?
Yes.
If you're a senior with all kinds of health issues, you try to get the most coverage you can, right, to minimize your out-of-pocket costs. So I'm just trying to figure out, because this only speaks to medically necessary biotesting.
So when the bill, HB 2333, I think that was the original bill that is being referenced, that was first introduced without the language of medical necessary. That the medical necessary language was an amendment that was recommended by Kaiser. And we actually, if this bill does, if we introduce the bill next year, we're going to ask for that not to be part of the bill because we don't want the insurance companies or Kaiser or whoever to determine what is medically necessary. The original bill does set the parameters of what qualifies a person to get biomarker testing. So it's not like anybody can ask for biomarker testing. You have to fit a certain criteria in order to be able to qualify for biomarker testing. So it's not like, everybody's getting it for any kind of reason. It's stated clearly in, well, it was stated clearly in House Bill 2333.
Yeah, I guess that's part of my problem is this resolution doesn't ask the auditor to look at that. What criteria would be set, right, to necessitate the biomarker testing?
I understand your question. So when we, if this resolution passes and we have the opportunity to talk to the auditor, we're going to request that they look at all aspects of or whatever is required for the biomarker testing.
Okay. That are medically necessary,
Well,
or,
we're going to have them look at the social and financial impacts of biomarker testing. And of course, like the bill did have that language of what's medically necessary, but we're going to ask them to, because the term medically necessary, again, we're afraid that it's determined by, the insurance saying that, oh, it's not medically necessary, and we don't want that to happen. We want them not to deny
Right,
someone
right.
the right to, or if they qualify, to be able to get biomarker testing.
right, but you guys are also concerned that not everybody should just request it.
Of course, yeah, they have to
Yeah.
fit a certain qualification.
So do you know how much it costs for these tests?
I don't,
Approximately?
so in my testimony, I did submit the cost, there is, should be a cost analysis. With insurance, I don't have my testimony in front of me, but with insurance, I think it's between, with insurance coverage, is $74 to, I think, 280 something, I don't exactly remember. But if you don't have insurance, biomarker testing can be like thousands of dollars.
Right, right. And so, but it also could have an impact on premium rates, right? For insurance, for medical insurance.
It could, but we hope that the auditor can help to assess what that might be.
Okay, okay, thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any further questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll be moving on to HCR 72, HD1, and HR 57, HD1. This is requesting the insurance commissioner to coordinate and develop a wildfire insurance compact. First to testify, we have the insurance division from DCCA with comments.
Good afternoon. The DCCA Insurance Division stands on its written testimony offering comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michael Walker from the DLNR in support.
Aloha, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Sayama, members of the committee. My name is Michael Walker. I serve as the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, statewide fire protection forester. And the department stands on its written testimony and support, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll be taking a short recess for decision-making. Recess. Good afternoon, and reconvening the House Committee on Consumer Protection and Commerce. Again, this is the decision-making for today's agenda, starting with HCR 151, HR 130, referencing the written testimony from DAGS, provided that they requested additional financing to conduct a study. This committee doesn't have the means to do so, and so we will be deferring this measure. Moving on, we have HCR 100. This is encouraging developers to incorporate net zero water building strategies when constructing and renovating housing projects in the state. We will also be deferring this measure as the written testimony noted that there are ongoing initiatives already being conducted on the county and department level. Moving on to HCR 139, HR 120. We will also be deferring this measure as there was insufficient testimony provided by key stakeholders within the departments and community. Moving on to HCR 212, HR 192, we will be amending this measure. Excuse me. We'll be amending this measure to highlight and perhaps narrow the scope of the Department of Health's investigation and policy to food products and consumable products that include PFAS. We do acknowledge that there are a number of products, both consumable and not, that do include PFAS, which the Department of Health noted was detrimental to human and environmental health. However, given the limited resources I believe the department has, we will be changing the language from lines 10 to 11 to read, the Department of Health is urged to investigate and implement policies to reduce the importation of ingestible food and beverage products, packaging, or materials containing PFAS into the state. And rest will be the same. Okay, members, any comments on this measure?
Vice Chair?
Representative Onishi.
Yeah, thank you for those amendments. My only concern is that in order to set policy, the department should be doing it from an understanding of research and data. And you know, I guess the inference that because a product is in a container that may contain PFAS, that food is unsafe. But there might be the alternatives to how that food is packaged might be more expensive than what is currently the cost, and then would be passed on to the consumer. So without them doing the studies first in order to determine what is the data, for them to set policy, I think is premature. So, you know, I would appreciate if this resolution was just for them to study what the potential is in terms of whether or not food products of PFAS leaches into the food products being packaged. What is how are these packaging handled in terms of whether it's being recycled or if it's, you know, how it's being disposed of, and is it safe for the Hawaii environment? So that there wouldn't be any additional costs to the consumer in terms of this particular issue. So with that not being the purpose of the resolution, I think at this point I'm going to be voting with reservations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any further questions or comments? Representative Lowen.
I wasn't going to, but now I feel obligated. There's extensive data about the connection to PFAS in food packaging and it, contaminating food and being consumed. And so, and in addition, there's actually, I think about a month ago, or recently announced, it's a voluntary agreement, but at a national level to work on phasing PFAS out of food packaging. So, respectfully, it's just a resolution. It's a suggestion for DOH to be more proactive on policy, and I appreciate us moving it forward with amendments. But the implication that there's not sufficient data is just not the case.
Okay, thank you. Members, any further comments? Seeing none, Chair for HCR 212, HR 192 with amendments.
Okay, HCR 212, HR 192, Vice Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Amado, excuse. Representative Bellotti.
Aye.
Representative Hashem, excuse. Representative Hussey Burdick, excuse. Representative Gates, excuse. Representative Lowen.
Aye.
Representative Onishi, reservations. Representative Tam.
Aye.
Representative Pyrick.
Aye.
Vice Chair, motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to HCR 213, HD1, HR 193, HD1. My recommendation is that we add language on page 3 between subsection 8 and 9 to add a representative from local fuel distributors to be invited by the chairperson of this working group. We'll also note the report being submitted by this working group is currently no later than December 1st, 2026. As was noted in the written testimony, it could be done by 2025. So we will add language here saying that the report, a final report, be submitted to the governor and legislature no later than 20 days prior to the convening of the regular session of 2025. Okay, members, any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, Chair, voting on HCR 213, HD1, HR 193, HD1 with amendments.
Voting on resolutions with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Knowing the absences of Amado, Hashem, Hussey Burdick, and Gates, are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to HCR 5 HR 1. My recommendation is that we move this resolution forward as is. Members, any comments? Okay, seeing none, Chair for the vote, as is.
HR 1, HCR 5, motion is, recommendation is to pass unamended, knowing the excused absences of Representative Amado, Hashem, Hussey Burdick, and Gates. Are there any noes? Any reservations? Vice Chair, motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to HCR 53. My recommendation is that we pass this measure out as is. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Chair for the vote, as is.
HCR 53, passing unamended, knowing the excused absences of Representative Amado, Hashem, Hussey Burdick, and Gates. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Vice Chair, motion carries.
Thank you. Finally, HCR 72 HD1, HR 57 HD1. I would like to note, just for the record, that the DCCA's written testimony noted that there isn't any requirement for a compact to exchange information with other states regarding the issues of wildfires. So we will be deferring this measure. Thank you, everyone. This committee is adjourned.